This is not for you. You're listening to Literature Done Juicy, a show that explores books in the juiciest way possible. My name's Jade, and in this season we're exploring novels which feature lost protagonists. This is episode 3 of the second season, and today we'll be discussing the novel House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. Before we get straight into it, it is very windy outside and there is a lot of work being done on the house across the road from me. So if there's a little bit of background noise, I apologise, but there's not really much I can do with it. So onwards and upwards. House of Leaves is infamously complex and has so many layers to it, and as you can probably see from the episode time, it's a little bit longer than my usual ones for this season, but it is certainly needed to discuss this book in detail because it is a monster of a book, and hopefully it piques your interest just as much as it did mine. Now, I started this episode with saying this is not for you, which is actually the first page of the novel after the title and the foreword. And it's just one single line that obviously states this is not for you. And this is just on an otherwise blank page. And it really sets the eerie tone which follows you throughout this entire read. Because this novel is so complex, I will try my best to explain it. And I'll start with the plots and the layout of the novel. House of Leaves, in a nutshell, is an amateur's analysis of an academic text about a documentary about a family who lives in a house that's a quarter-inch longer on the inside than it is on the outside. The story begins with the narrative from Johnny Truant, who works as a tattoo artist in Los Angeles. He loves his drugs and spends most of his spare time in bars and strip clubs, and when he's searching for a new apartment, he is told by a friend that there's one available in his very building. It was once occupied by an old man called Zampano, who is blind and recently passed away. And the reason I'm mentioning that he is blind because it's important. It's not just some random fact that I've thrown in there. Once Johnny is inside the apartment, he finds notes and transcripts which were written by Zampano referring a documentary titled The Navidson Record. So yeah, a blind man supposedly written all of these without being able to see. The documentary itself was directed by a photographer named Will Navidson, and it documents him and his family buying a new home on Ash Tree Lane where the strange occurrences begin. The family begins to notice the house is actually larger on the inside than it is on the outside, and the dimensional differences change exponentially the longer that the family stays within the home, and eventually a long and dark hallway appears in the living room via a door in the wall. This door itself should actually lead to the house's backyard, but instead it provides an entry point to the mysterious hallway. And this hallway is actually known as the 5.5-minute hallway. The hallway itself leads into a labyrinth within the house that couldn't really possibly exist. So Johnny, after reading all about the documentary that Zampano was writing footnotes about, decides to research it himself and also to go through the notes and the literature that Zampano has compiled and edit it himself as well. As we follow Johnny editing the manuscript and adding his own footnotes, it actually begins to make us question the manuscript is real or if Johnny's just simply made this up in his head. When the house within the Navidson record is being described, it really makes you imagine the type of work that MC Escher does, where it's like he's the artist that does these staircases that go upside down and kind of lead everywhere, and also give you a very Harry Potter-esque kind of vibe with like the staircases changing direction and you're getting trapped once you go a certain way. As you've probably figured out on your own, House of Leaves is extremely meta and has multiple reading paths. It's very Inception-like, and this is due to the layout of the novel itself and the little side quests that the author added during the publication to create an extremely dedicated and loyal fan base. Even the editions of the novel lead to some confusion, as some listed editions of the novel are completely fiction, whereas others are the real deal. And from my knowledge, there are 2 editions, not including the paperback and hardcover versions of the 2 editions, and one is the full-coloured remastered version and the other is the 2-coloured edition, when that's usually the one that has the doorknob on the front cover. So what's the difference? In the full-coloured remastered version, which is the version that I personally read, The word house appears in blue and the word minotaur and all crossed out lines appear in the colour red. The blue is supposed to reference hyperlinks, which are found on websites. There is also one line within the novel written in purple, and all the pictures and appendices are full colour, and there are also braille sections, but the braille sections aren't raised, they're flat, with translations in the footnotes. In the two-coloured edition, either the word house appears in blue or Minotaur and the crossed-out passages appear in red, but you don't know which one you have until you purchase the novel, unless, of course, you buy it in a store and you can physically see it. This version is not really available in stores, so you won't be able to do that. The line that is purple in the other edition I've mentioned is not purple, it's just not coloured, and there is no braille. Some appendices might be in colour and some might be in black and white, but like the house and the Minotaur, you don't know until you receive your copy. How interesting is that? So before you even purchase your copy, you're tasked with deciphering which version is best. And if you go for the two-coloured edition, you don't even know what you're going to get. It's a gamble. It's very smart and it promotes readers to buy multiple editions if they're diehard fans, which in turn creates higher profit margins. Once you have a copy of the book in your hand and you have the physical copy, because audio versions and ebooks do not exist of House of Leaves, you then have the experience of reading the text. The print novel acting as a paradox in a digital age by encouraging readers to use the internet to decipher the story. Upon the publication of House of Leaves in March 2000, there was a website which was essentially a Reddit forum where readers could post their theories surrounding the novel. The website URL was just houseofleaves.com, and if you type that in at the moment, it just leads you directly to the author's website and not the original website that was in place back in the 2000s. To view what the website actually used to look like, you need to use the Wayback Machine, and I've left a link in the show notes below, so if you want to check it out, you can. And it adds to the creepiness of the story just because the website no longer exists about a book written about a documentary that doesn't exist. Just adds even more layers that I don't think that the author intended to do when he first created the website. So back to House of Leaves, the book itself. So each narrative uses a different font, so you know whose perspective that you are reading. So Zampano, who's the blind man, his academic commentary appears in the infamous font Times Roman. Johnny's is in Courier font, which essentially is associated with typewriters, and the notations from the unknown editors, who are also referred to as Ed, are written in Bookman font. And I understand I haven't actually mentioned the editors yet, but they're the final people to be working on the manuscript that Zampano was working on, and then Johnny was working on, and then they're the final editors who are unknown people. We don't actually know who they are. Other than these characters that I've just referenced, and then obviously the Naberson family who feature in the documentary that Zampano is writing about, there is also Palafina, who is Johnny's mother, and her perspectives are written in the Dante font, which is an ironic reference to Dante's Inferno, especially considering that she is writing these letters in a mental asylum. Like the changing of the house, the narrations collapse onto one another, leading the reader to feel disorientated, and also for the narratives themselves to blend into one being. And this replicates how Will Naberson is feeling when he is trapped within the house. Okay, so on top of the fonts and the colouring, the actual layout of the words are played with to make the reader, again, feel and experience the same emotions that the characters are experiencing. So for example, some passages of the text literally twist and turn, forcing the reader to pick up the book and rotate it, making the experience interactive on top of the interactive moments you have when you're researching the footnotes listed and participating in the forums on the website. Also included in the text are those footnotes, which can even take up entire pages. And some of these footnotes reference real things, while others are completely made up. And it's up to you whether or not you want to actually research the footnotes and figure out on your own which ones are real and which ones aren't, which in turn replicates what Johnny is doing to Zampano's manuscript and texts. I've seen one theory where people believe the author is critiquing hoity-toity academics. However, there is an interview, which I've linked in the show notes, where he states that he has a lot of respect for academics and hopes that they enjoy dissecting the novel. And in the same interviewer, a listener asked the author where footnote 183 can be found, as it is missing. The interviewer tries to blame it as an error, but Danielewski states there has been no errors in the book. And then the author goes on to find the footnote, and this is a direct quote. He states, Eureka, I found it. The missing text for footnote 183 can be found on page 140. It was a little hard to locate because it's written backwards. End quote. And you can see why this novel is basically just a labyrinth in itself when the author can't even figure out or remember where that missing footnote is. To add to this already intricate and confusing setup, the author's sister actually released several songs at the time of the publication in the 2000s, which reference House of Leaves, and the album itself was named Haunted. The author also published a second text entitled The Whalestow Letters, which comprises of further letters written by Palafina, Johnny's mother, and is an official companion to the House of Leaves novel. The novella screams Sylvia Plath to me, and I really do believe it's like a reference to the published journals of Sylvia Plath, which are rightly entitled Journals of Sylvia Plath. The publishers didn't muck around on that one, straight to the point. Funnily enough, the descent into madness is a common theme in House of Leaves, and it appears to be demonstrated by both Johnny, his mother, and the Navidson family. And this is because the uncanny is ripe within these stories. So what is the uncanny? It is a Freudian theory which is using the German words, and I'm going to, again, butcher this. Foreign words just aren't my jam, but the two words are Heimlich and unheimlich, and it uses both of these words to define itself. So Heimlich is related to things that are familiar and cozy, and unheimlich is related to things that are unfamiliar and eerie. So the uncanny simply means something that should be familiar and safe, and it feels unfamiliar or eerie. And in aesthetic terms, the uncanny actually has a lot to do with feelings or emotional impulses. And this is where the House of Leaves steps in. So the first references to the uncanny can be seen in the changes within the house itself. Navison's first reaction is disbelief as an inanimate object which represents home shouldn't have a mind of its own. Navison even attempts to use a compass to orientate himself within the house, which actually just is useless. He even notes that the needle never stays still and that the compass does not work inside the house. The Navison family as a whole chose to move to the house on Ash Tree Lane to start a new life and to start afresh, and instead the house begins to represent the anxieties and the psychological problems within the family itself through its architectural changes. This specific theme can be found quite commonly in Gothic horrors, and one infamous example is the novel The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, where the inhabitants begin to go nuts due to the odd behaviours of the house itself. The uncanny was extremely prevalent in literature during the post-war era, and another example of a novel which we discussed back in season 1 is The Virgin Suicides by Jeff Eugenides. The Gothic uncanny allows for the representation of anxieties of the post-war time, where the suburbs, which should be safe and comfortable, turn into the unknown through the suicides of the girls within the town. The house the girls live in begins to crumble into ruin, while simultaneously their mental health is doing the same. And the facade of the known morphs into the unknown, much like the house on Ash Tree Lane in House of Leaves. The house, like a labyrinth, undergoes changes over time. It isn't inherently good or bad, it's not safe or traumatic, rather it encompasses all of these aspects. And this mirrors the complexity of homes behind closed doors, where families conceal their true dynamics and everyone assumes personas, giving the illusion that all is well. Another concept which is intricately connected to the notions of the home and the uncanny is hospitality. So on the surface, hospitality entails welcoming guests, but it's a dynamic that can easily shift, turning hosts and guests into either unwilling hostages or draining parasites. And we've all encountered that persistent guest who overstays their welcome and you're just like, please get out of my house. And we've all been to an event where the host insists that you remain and you want to run for the hills. Now, these situations exemplify what should be enjoyable and secure. Instead, it triggers discomfort and it also evokes an unexpected emotional reaction. The house on Ash Tree Lane epitomizes all of this, but it also adds a layer of uncertainty due to the reliability of Will Navidson's and Johnny's minds. This also makes House of Leaves unreliable itself because it's forcing readers to use critical thinking to attempt to crack the codes or find meaning within the novel. So speaking about cracking codes and solving puzzles, labyrinths are probably one of the most confusing and intricate puzzles that you can come across. Usually the people who are attempting to solve the labyrinth, they either stay trapped, so then it demonstrates the destruction and deterioration of their minds, or they manage to solve the labyrinth and become whole again. Labyrinths are infamously difficult to solve and have been around since ancient times, adding more evidence to the fact that the house on Ash Tree Lane itself may have also been around for much longer than people would realise. In the academic paper in the Acknowledgements of the Idea of the Labyrinth by Penelope Reed Doob, she states, "Once a verbal maze exists, its architect needs readers and listeners willing to venture inside and report on what they have seen." And this direct quote, it's basically the foundation for the Navidson documentary, as the documentary allows for the report of what's occurring alongside Johnny's and Zampano's accounts. In the Middle Ages, there was a slight different definition to what a maze or a labyrinth must include, and one of the main factors within this definition is that a maze must have confusion at its core. So the confusion must lead to some form of disorientation, confusion of the mind, essentially. So labyrinths have artistry versus chaos and order versus confusion. So it's very, very similar to the familiar and unfamiliar, which lies within the definition of the uncanny. Right at the start of this episode, I mentioned that the full-coloured version of the House of Leaves includes struck-out references to the Minotaur in red, which is a direct link to Labyrinths, as the Minotaur in Greek mythology lived on the island Crete, who was imprisoned by King Minos. And don't worry, I will take a deeper dive into the Minotaur at the end of the episode. The labyrinth within the house falls under liminal horror or liminal spaces, and liminal simply means a place in between. Liminal spaces can affect your mental health. It's very similar to our main protagonist in the House of Leaves. There are a few types of liminal spaces, and they are metaphorical, emotional, and physical. Physical liminal spaces can come in the form of stairways or doorways. Emotional liminal spaces can come in the form of divorce or death of a loved one. And a metaphorical liminal space can be seen as a choice between two options and feeling stuck within that choice. Although liminal spaces are not usually dangerous, when they're perceived as dangerous, they can cause stress, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. Will Navidson uses his labyrinth within the home to help him confront his guilt of an event that occurred during his photography career. And this is one of many things which the labyrinth makes the occupants face during their time within the confines of its walls. The guilt that Will Navidson has is that he photographed a dying Sudanese girl, and this photograph won him the Pulitzer Prize. Now, this has caused him extreme guilt because he doesn't know actually what happened to the girl, and he feels like he potentially left her for dead, and he questions what he could have done instead of just leaving her there. Now, this photograph within the novel is fictional, however, it has a very, very real direct reference, and it is referencing a photograph which was taken in 1993 entitled The Vulture and the Little Girl, which appeared in the New York Times in the same year and was photographed by Kevin Carter. Although it is entitled The Vulture and the Little Girl, it was later found out that the person in the photograph was a severely malnourished young boy, and the photograph depicted this child basically collapsed on the ground, and behind them was a vulture. It basically just looked like the vulture was there waiting to eat the child. The child themselves was actually on the way to a UN food centre within Sudan, and at the time they didn't actually know whether or not the child had made it to the food centre after the photograph had been taken. If you're interested in seeing the photograph which I am talking about, I have left a link to it in the show notes, as I have with everything else. The photograph itself also won the Pulitzer Prize, and I keep thinking I'm pronouncing this wrong. Is it Pulitzer or Pulitzer? But anyway, it won this prize in 1994, and the photograph itself is quite sad, so I guess there is a bit of a trigger warning if you are going to click on the link and have a look at it. And then adding on to this very tragic and pretty horrific photo, the photographer, Kevin Carter, he suicided in July 1994 at the age of 33, and it was only a few months after he received the prize that he took his own life. He actually left a suicide letter, which has been made open to the public. And I am going to read the letter because it shows his remorse and grief and, I guess, trauma over what happened to him as a photographer. So I guess another trigger warning because it's, quite confronting. It's the final words of someone who's taken their own life. So it stated, "I'm really, really sorry. The pain of life overrides the joy to the point that joy does not exist. Depressed, without a phone, without money for rent, money for child support, money for debts, money, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. I am haunted by the vivid memories of killings and corpses and anger and pain, of starving or wounded children, of trigger-happy madmen, often police, of killing executioners. I have gone to join Ken if I am that lucky. Kevin Carter." And I believe that Ken was a friend of his. But yeah, it's quite horrific and it's quite sad. And especially knowing that, a few months after winning a prize for an image that obviously really haunted him, it's quite, sad. It's not really much more I can say in terms of that. So I guess other than the pit of despair, that little fact left you in, it's very clear that the photograph reference where Will Navidson has taken a photo of a starving child is definitely a direct reference to Kevin Carter. And it's giving us a narrative of what potentially he could have gone through if he had not suicided. And also it adds, just another eerie, creepy layer into an already jam-packed story. So like I said, this was one of the many explorations that Will and the Navison household as a whole experienced using the Labyrinth. Will experiences fear, obsession, isolation, guilt and loss of control through his experience within the house's liminal and uncanny spaces. And this same experience is actually emulated within 2 horror games entitled Control and Anatomy. These 2 video games are similar to the House of Leaves as they each include a building which does not have any entities, yet the uncanny and the liminal make it scary. These games use similar techniques to the House of Leaves to make the player feel strange and uncomfortable, and they both use aspects of a labyrinth within their playstyles. As some of you may or may not know, I'm a complete video game nerd. I'm definitely a console player though, but I should get onto PC. So I definitely want to check these out because I personally haven't played them, but I've done a little bit of digging and seen a little bit of the footage from people playing the games. So here goes my best description of the 2. I'll start off with Control. So the game centers around a secret US government agency's mission to contain and study a mysterious building known as the Oldest House. This agency aims to harness the formidable powers within the house to combat a very highly powerful adversary. And it's similar to House of Leaves, it uses a substantial amount of in-game data and notes, most of which are authored by members of the agency. But despite the abundance of these documents, they collectively emphasize that the government's profound lack of understanding regarding the Oldest House. And this shared theme of exploration and enigma within extraordinary structures ties Control to the narrative style of House of Leaves. I found that the second game's website, so Anatomy, gave off the vibes of the old House of Leaves website in terms of the font and the layout and the structuring. The graphics of the game itself are low resolution and the game is an indie game, meaning it's pretty low budget, and I think it was just one person who created and developed the game. The story of Anatomy is that you play as a voiceless, bodiless person who is walking around an abandoned house collecting old cassette tapes. The game is intentionally dark and glitchy, and the house itself hates you and is basically telling you this through structural movements. The house is apparently angry with the protagonist because it has been brought into existence but then left to rot, and the abandonment created this haunted house which inverts the usual tropes of a house becoming abandoned because it is haunted. Both Control and Anatomy are 2 games that share very intriguing parallels with House of Leaves. They all feature buildings that are inherently eerie and devoid of traditional supernatural entities, yet are saturated with the uncanny that provokes discomfort and the disquiet. They immerse the player in a world of eerie architecture and unsettling mysteries, showcasing the enduring allure of such narratives. In Anatomy, the house is angry because it has been left to rot, and this is actually something that appears within House of Leaves and is very, very relevant to the book of Leviticus. If you're unfamiliar with the book of Leviticus because you're a heathen like me and don't really know much about religion, the book has been described as basically a priest's handbook, and included within it are instructions from the Lord. In House of Leaves, the house itself is a central element of the narrative, and it's not just a physical space, but a deeply enigmatic and labyrinthy entity that continually changes and distorts and defies traditional notions of architecture and reality. And yes, I do realize I just said labyrinthy and made up a word, so sorry. The specific passage in question that is quite relevant is chapter 14 and verse 44. And this line states, "The priest is to go and examine it, and if the mold has spread in the house, it is persistent and defiling mold, and the house is unclean." And then there is also another verse in the same chapter, which is chapter 14 and then verse 37, where the line explains what the priests are to do if they suspect that there is mold. And it states, "He is to examine the mold on the walls, and if it has greenish or reddish depressions that appear to be deeper than the surface of the wall," and that's where the line stops. So appears to be deeper than the surface of the wall. Very, very similar to the door that's supposed to lead to the outside of the home. These passages also explore the idea of contamination and corruption within a house. And the house in the novel is not simply a physical structure, it's a psychological and metaphysical space that becomes increasingly disorientating as the characters explore it. That verse 37 is also directly referenced when describing the door in House of Leaves, as it is described as, quote unquote, deeper than the wall. The mold infestation can be seen as a symbolic representation of the house disturbing and defiling influence in House of Leaves, emphasizing the house's role in the novel as a place that defies understanding and normalcy, much like the persistence and unclean mold described in the Bible. I'll also explain the way in which the priests were told to purify the house by the Lord, as it's pretty out there, so I just thought I'd add it in here as a little bit of a fun fact. So to get rid of the mold, the Lord directs the priests to get 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop, which is actually a plant belonging to the mint family. Now, the priest needs to get one of these birds and kill it over fresh water in a clay pot. Can't be old water, won't do. And it also doesn't specify how to kill the bird over the pot, which would lead me to be pretty confused if I was being directed to do this. But once the bird is dead, you then get the live bird, because you've only killed one, and you get cedar, yarn, the mint plant, and then dip them all in the blood of the dead bird, and then release the live bird into the fields outside the town to make atonement for the house. And fear not, this method doesn't only have to be used for mold in a house, it can also be used for defiling skin diseases, sores, swelling, or rashes. It's basically a multi-purpose cleansing tool, and it's a shame that the Nabitsons weren't aware of this bird sacrifice that may have alleviated some of their problems. Other than the Bible reference, due to the countless footnotes and referencing found within House of Leaves, there are a few important mythological ones which I want to discuss. And the first one that we'll get into is the Minotaur, and the references of red and it being crossed out whenever it is being discussed. So as previously stated, the Minotaur comes from Greek mythology, and here is the crux of the story. Ages ago, there was a powerful king named Minos who ruled the island of Crete. King Minos had a white bull. It was a gift from the god Poseidon, but instead of sacrificing the bull as a sign of respect, King Minos kept it. This then pissed off Poseidon, and he made Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. Because she now had the hots for this animal, she got her mate Daedalus to devise a plan to satisfy her unnatural desire. So he actually created a wooden cow that she could sit inside and enable her to mate with the white bull. So messed up. So she then gives birth to a monstrous half-human, half-bull creature, which is named our infamous Minotaur. To contain this creature, King Minos, so her husband, constructs a labyrinth underneath his palace in Crete, and the Minotaur is placed inside the labyrinth where it becomes its home. King Minos really fears the Minotaur and actually gets 7 young men and 7 young women as tribute to be sent to the labyrinth to be devoured by the Minotaur. But then Theseus, who is a brave hero, helped by King Minos' daughter, gives him a ball of thread to help him navigate the labyrinth so he doesn't get lost. So he enters the labyrinth, defeats the Minotaur, finds his way back because he's got the thread, and then flees Crete with King Minos' daughter and returns to Athens as a hero. So just as the original Minotaur from this story was monstrous and hidden within a labyrinth, the Minotaur passages in the House of Leaves represent hidden and mysterious aspects of the story. It serves as a beast which is entering the Navicens family's psyche. It symbolises the unknown and the trauma, as well as the fearsome and complex, much like the maze-like structure of the house and the book itself. Some people also believe that the struck out passages with the red line through them about the Minotaur serve as a reference to King Minos' daughter, Ariadne, and her string. So the lines are literally the string that is used to escape the labyrinth and also to defeat the Minotaur. Another thing of note is that the passages about the Minotaur were struck out by Zamparo, but then Johnny and the subsequent unknown editors decided to keep the passages of the Minotaur within the final cut or edition of the story. I know that was a long one just because I had to recite the story of the Minotaur. So I'll go through just one more mythological reference which is included in the House of Leaves, and it's fitting because it's going to end this podcast, and it also is the last and final page within the House of Leaves itself. And don't worry, it's not particularly a spoiler because the House of Leaves doesn't really give away what's happened. You've got to guess it yourself, but it is the last and final clue of the novel. As we all know, the house is situated on Ash Tree Lane, and at the final page of the novel, the word Yggdrasil is spelt out vertically with a poem written underneath. And the poem says, "What miracle is this giant tree? I stands 10,000 feet high, but doesn't reach the ground, still it stands. Its roots must hold the sky." So what is Yggdrasil? Well, it comes from Norse mythology and is an enormous ash tree that connects the 9 worlds and is central to the cosmos. It splits into every reality and the branches extend as far as the heavens, and the tree itself is supported by 3 roots. The 9 worlds themselves actually have never been clearly listed, but scholars have written theories as to which mythological worlds they believe the 9 to be. The fact that this page is at the end of the book and the house itself is situated on Ash Tree Lane is a definite direct reference to this sacred mythological tree. So what does it mean? It could be a hint to an interdimensional theme, such as the in-between space within the house as part of another dimension. Another interpretation could be that the house was the tree and then it has evolved in time into the house that the Navicens have purchased. Although we and the family experience the house as a labyrinth, it could be our interpretation of something more than 4-dimensional that we cannot comprehend. In essence, the house exists in metaphorical liminality. It's definitely a head spinner. And I think that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learnt something new. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and rate and review if you haven't already. In the next episode, we will be exploring the new Australian novel West Girls by Kate Elizabeth Woolett, which follows a girl who has lost her identity and uses others from various cultural backgrounds to create a new one. Stay juicy, and I look forward to chatting to you next time. Bye!